Mosher, really an honor to sit down with you.
Well, thank you.
You've written extensively on China over the years. You were also one of the first American scholars granted access to do any type of in-depth research inside of China. Talk to us about what that experience was like and what you came to understand with your own eyes inside of communist China in the 70s.
Well, I arrived in China in March of 1979. I was part of the scholarly exchange group of 50 that was sent to China by the United States after we normalized diplomatic relations. I was the only one in that group allowed to do unsupervised research among the Chinese people themselves. You know, when I went to China, I had been educated at Stanford University. And we had a number of people at Stanford University who were very, very much admirers of the Chinese Communist Party and of Chairman Mao. We had Professor John Gurley in the economics department writing books about how wonderful Mao's economic plans were and how the communes had greatly improved the lives of the Chinese people. We had the former Democrat candidate Kamala Harris's father, Professor Harris, at Stanford, who was also a big believer in the success of communist China's effort to create a new socialist man and a new socialist woman. And so those were kind of the attitudes that I took with me when I went to China. It didn't take very long for the Chinese people to convince me that all of that was simply a fantasy created in the minds of Western socialist-minded people. Really, the reality on the ground was a brutal reminder of what communism is like in action. Because one of the things that happened after I arrived in China was, first of all, I was taken out by a new friend of mine to a little hill outside the village. And he said this was the hill where, when the Red Army came into the village, they executed all of the former clan elders and the former members of the local militia. Now every village had a militia because that was the local police force to protect them from robbers and bandits. They were all executed. All the guns were confiscated, and the leaders of the village were executed, and new leaders were appointed by the Chinese Communist Party. That was kind of a wake-up call. On top of all this, and we're talking about human rights violation after human rights violation, tyranny after tyranny, brutality after brutality, the one-child policy began when I was in the village. The new policy was that the population of Guangdong province could not be allowed to increase more than 1% in the year 1980. And so I said, well, what are you going to do? And the secretary of the Communist Party committee said, it's very simple. We'll do a house-to-house search of the village. We'll identify all of the women who are pregnant with illegal second and third and fourth children. And then we will tell them they must get abortions. Communist officials would say things like, you there who are 9 months pregnant, don't think you can simply stay in this lockup until you give birth, because we will not allow you to take your baby home. Should you go into labor before you give us permission to do an abortion, we will simply kill your baby at birth. I went with these women as they were taken to the local medical clinic and aborted by cesarean section. Again, most of them were 7, 8, 9 months pregnant. They decided to do two things to stop these babies from being born, to stop the population of Guangdong province from increasing, right? First, they gave a lethal injection into the womb to kill the unborn child. And then 24 to 48 hours later, they would do the cesarean section abortion and remove the now dead or dying baby. But there were women who were brought in at the last minute in labor, too late to give the poison shot into the womb. So what would they do with those? They would take a hypodermic needle, fill the syringe with alcohol or formaldehyde, and wait until the baby's head was crowning. Babies are mostly born head first. And they would inject the alcohol or formaldehyde into the fontanelle, the soft spot in the child's head, and the child would die in convulsions seconds, minutes later. And after they were forcibly aborted, they then would sterilize them. They would do a tubal ligation to make sure these violators would never come back in following years pregnant with another illegal child. So they took away the prospect of any future babies being born. And there was, in the 80s and 90s, and until the one-child policy ended, there was an epidemic of suicide in China, which, when in most countries, most suicides are men, elderly men. In China, the suicides were mostly young women. Why were they committing suicide? They were committing suicide because the Communist Party had forcibly aborted a baby they had conceived in love, and they couldn't get over the loss, and so they ended their lives in consequence. And I decided I would do what I could to let America and the world know what was really happening in China. This didn't come without a cost, of course, and the cost was that Stanford was forced by the Chinese Communist Party to choose between me and continuing ties with China. Literally, they were told that your scholarly exchange agreement with China between Stanford and the Ministry of Education will be ended unless you punish Steven Mosher severely. And punish me they did. They sent me packing.
There's been horrific revelations over the past decade in the 2000s of the allegations of forced live organ harvesting inside of China of prisoners, religious prisoners of conscience, whether they be Falun Gong or now the Uyghurs and others. A lot of people's reaction to that is just simply, and there's been films titled with regard to this topic, hard to believe. Based on what you've seen with your own eyes inside of China, do you think that this crime that we're speaking of is possible?
Oh, I think forced organ harvesting in China is a big business because you see they have literally a captive population of people to harvest from. Many years ago, looked into this whole topic in depth because it was of a piece with the other human rights violations that I had earlier studied in China and documented. And I became convinced that Falun Gong, first and foremost, but also other political prisoners of conscience and other minorities were being tissue typed when they were arrested. And if they were a tissue match for a Communist Party official who needed a new heart or lung or liver or cornea, that they would be killed for that purpose. I also did research and because into a procedure called ECMO, which is extracorporeal membranous oxygenation. One of my sons was born prematurely and had to have this artificial heart-lung machine, this extracorporeal membranous oxygenation, used to allow his lungs to mature so he could live, and he's quite well and healthy now. He's 30 years old. But this technology was taken to China by a particular doctor and now is used to make organ harvesting even more profitable, because before the advent of this heart-lung machine procedure, you could just harvest a heart, but by the time you harvested the heart, the other organs would have started decaying. Now what you do is you use the extracorporeal oxygenation to continue the blood flow to the organs while you cut off the blood flow to the brain, killing the donor, but allowing you to harvest not just the heart or a liver, but a heart and a liver and a lungs and all the other organs as well, because it keeps the organs perfused with blood. This was a technology that came from the United States, invented to save lives, which is now being used to make forced organ harvesting in China even more profitable for the communist officials in charge. I have told officials at the Vatican, I have told officials at the U.S. State Department, I have testified before the British Parliament on human rights abuses in China, including kinds of abuses. I am absolutely convinced that forced organ harvesting began decades ago, and it has gotten more common and more sophisticated over the years, and that people are being deliberately killed in China for their organs. And the only thing you need to know to prove that is happening is that you can order a heart or transplant in advance. That can only happen if someone is killed for the purpose of providing you with that heart. You see, because everywhere else in the world, you sign up and you wait
Months, if not years.
months, if not years, for a transplant. In China, you sign up and they say, come on October 16th, and we will have your new heart ready and waiting for you. The only way that can happen is if they're killing someone in order to provide that heart for you. So we need to ban people from going to China for organ transplants, because everyone who goes to China for an organ transplant is complicit in the death of an innocent in China.